Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Needs Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we go week to week, breaking down a popular streaming show, providing some context and some recommendations along the way. In today's episode, we are discussing the 9th episode of the second season of The Pitt. Joining me again for that conversation is my wife, who is a medical provider, bringing her usual medical insights to the reality or lack of reality of this show. And before that, we spend a few minutes discussing the most recent episode of Drops of God. If you have watched the first season of that show, first of all, recommend that first season of that show to anybody, unless you have a real aversion to watching people drink a lot of wine. This second season, not as satisfying as the first, but definitely has things to recommend it and has done some pretty interesting things. A big plot turn in this particular week of the show. So if you are behind, definitely catch up before you listen to our short breakdown of that episode. And that show is wrapping up next week, and we'll be wrapping up our conversation, those discussions at the same time, of course. But I have a couple of things we might continue to watch in tandem as we continue to watch The Pitt together. Also on the podcast, Sona and I will be continuing to discuss DTF St. Louis, the HBO series, as well as checking in on the season premiere of Rooster, this new university set comedy from Bill Lawrence, which is premiering this Sunday night. And of course, the very popular series Paradise on Hulu continues as well. And Darren and I will be discussing the 5th episode already, amazingly, because of that 3-episode season premiere, already more than halfway through this season of the show. So expect that episode early in the week as well. Since that is a science fiction show, we may also be checking in. I'll definitely be watching it, and we'll see if Darren gets a chance to catch up on War Machine as well on Netflix, and maybe discuss that in brief in that same episode. Okay, that's all to come, and many premieres coming in April. I'll be letting you know what we'll be covering throughout April and May as well. Make sure you subscribe so you get notifications when these episodes become available, and send us any feedback to needsomintroduction@gmail.com. With that out of the way, let's get into that conversation where we discuss this most recent episode of The Pitt. All right, Kim, so let's start things off with our usual few minutes spent on Drops of God, which is wrapping up next week. So we're just one episode away from the season finale here of season 2. A couple key points. One, of course, by the way, anybody, if you are behind on the show or interested in pursuing it, this is a very spoiler-ish conversation today. So be warned if you want to skip this part and you do plan to watch the show. But of course, a big event this week, this whole entire season, Issei has been dealing with the fact of his this revelation about his mom trying to drown him when he was a child. And after confronting her with this and talking to his best friend about it, after going on this trip into the middle of nowhere, and this revelation, or I should say this kind of understanding that he obviously doesn't forgive his mom, he says at one point, but he understands her a little bit. Unfortunately, that understanding came a little too late because his mom drowned herself. So this was pretty depressing turn of events. What did you think about this episode and this situation in general?
It is quite tragic. That's how it resolved itself. When she was pouring wine for dinner, when she was obviously alone in her vacation home with her maid, I actually thought when the cops showed up that she was going to take the wine bottle and break it and cut herself with it. But instead, she drinks the wine and drowns, which is...
Poetic in some ways.
Poetic is the word, yes. Everything comes full circle back to her, wine time with Alexandra and her son, who she has resented.
It's interesting that, and this is one of the things, I'm not a huge fan of this season of the show. I mean, it's fine. I actually have liked many things about it, but there are things I haven't loved about this season. But I was impressed in analyzing this episode a little bit that this show is written from a psychological perspective, which I thought was very interesting, because oftentimes you watch a show and it's very plot driven, or sometimes because the show is very plot driven, characters will do stuff just to advance the plot. And what's kind of interesting about this show is that everything is done from a psychological perspective. So for example, we have David and Camille in this episode, and you think about what happens between them, where she is entertaining this flirtation with him, but of course still trying to reconcile with Tomas. But there's obviously something there. And then you have David trying to tell her that you're more like me, something she doesn't want to accept about herself. And then basically meeting up with her enemy, this who she claims is her enemy. But I've always thought this is more complicated. This guy who, turned vengeful against her at the end of season 1. However, he did, you have to take the good with the bad in some ways, that he was the one who basically taught her everything about wine and allowed her to be in a position to win the claim. And then, of course, he wanted something bad back, quid pro quo. He wasn't there just for her well-being. And she's offended by that. But that's just how things are. But more interestingly is the fact that David forces her to say, hey, if you want to save this winery and you want to be involved with this, then, hey, why don't you make amends with this guy? Your bad blood with this guy's 3 years old. Just make amends with him. You want me to make amends with my sister? This stuff goes back way more than that. And Camille's like, you guys deserve each other. And it's so hypocritical for her to say that when you think about that. Like he's literally putting it in her face that you are not able to overcome your pettiness, not pettiness, but your, legitimate issues with this guy, this bad blood, which is only a few years old. But I'm supposed to just let bygones be bygones with my sister. So he's forcing her to confront aspects of her own hypocrisy, which I think is very interesting. And the other thing I think is very interesting about this as well is how we have these 4 people with these toxic relationships with their parents and who are all orphaned, right? David with this legacy of his father, with his wine, who still haunts him. And Issei now will be haunted by his mom forever because he doesn't have an opportunity to make amends. Alexander, again, didn't even know he was the father until way into the competition. And of course, Camille, all of them haunted by these parental figures. And I thought that's really interesting that all these characters are all driven by like the ghosts of their parents.
And David also makes the point that he doesn't see Camille as the family type to be home with a kid and taking care of other people, which is true, as none of these people will be. David doesn't have kids. Camille probably won't. Issei, I can't imagine. He's too traumatized by his childhood to want to be a parent, potentially. So it's an interesting comment on that.
Although David's sister, I forgot her name now again, but
Tamar,
right, has a daughter, at least, so she has overcome it in some ways. However, she also is haunted by this father figure.
But not in the same way as her brother is. Her brother was blamed for being born.
Right.
So different problem.
Well, I mean, but that's the other parallel that I think is interesting here. Again, the idea that literally David is never going to forgive his sister for taking the father's side when he's literally being blamed for being born. And think about Issei. Issei is nearly drowned by his mother. Nothing he did. He just reminds him of her mistake. And that is this unforgivable thing, this weight that you've put onto your child.
And now they're all traumatized.
Yeah. So very interesting. I'm very curious to see how this ends next week. I can't imagine this ending with a happy ending. Like, it's funny because season 1 was such in a way, a fantasy that ends on this very happy note that everyone kind of gets what they want and the bad guys all, don't get what they want. And now we have the exact opposite where, first of all, there are no good guys and bad guys and no one's going to end up with what they want. As a matter of fact, Camille got exactly what she wanted. Her plan went perfectly to spec, and she gets nothing that she wanted out of it.
Besides potentially creating more of a drama for a family that she doesn't even belong to. Because Tamar does not want to commercialize this wine, and now her life is going to be pure chaos because she is given the house, but her land is going to now be taken over for this, maybe not mass production, because they're going to only give it to a small proportion of high-paying wine connoisseurs, but still, Camille screwed that up. She screwed up her own relationship with her husband. Issei is now off doing whatever he is doing, and I don't know, everyone's be fractured in some way.
The only slight light at the end of the tunnel is that in the screenshot there for next week's episode for the season finale, we do seem to have Issei and Camille together. So at least she's showing up for her brother, finally.
And are they going to be conniving for season 3? Like, what is next? Is there a season 3?
I haven't heard an announcement for season 3, but they went a long time between season 1 and season 2. So I don't think this show's that popular. So I do hope that they do wrap things up with season 2 in case there isn't a season 3. Although I do think that they wanted to create enough intrigue here where some season 3 could occur. The only downside of that, or the only kind of potential blocker for anything like that, is that personally, I'm like, I said this to you when we were watching this episode of show, but like if next season rolls around and some letter comes in the mail on their birthday or something from the dead father, it's just like burn that immediately. That is bad news. Do not continue to let your dad's ghost keep leading you by the nose because it's not been good so far.
Do you think that Camille and Tomas are going to reconcile?
I don't know. I mean, I think that if they want to, I think there's a possibility because, at this point she's owns that vineyard that's where all the money's coming from to do all these things. So, at least they have to keep seeing each other. So maybe they'll reconcile. But I think his understanding of her is not only like you did this thing and you betrayed me and you lied to me. I think his understanding is like, you're not the type of person to settle down. And David is forcing her to make that same realization. So I don't know, maybe she's discovering herself that this is not the life that she wants. However, her mom here does warn her that keep acting the way you're acting, and you're going to die alone, just like your father. You might be the most famous wine person in the world, but you'll die alone.
No subtlety with that statement.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we'll know how that wraps up for next season. My guess would be that they'd have to somewhat kind of leave things like they did last season, where it could be a season finale, it could be a series finale, because I don't think this show I don't know how this does overseas, in the US at least. It doesn't seem to be big enough to sustain another season of the show, but who knows?
We shall see.
I wouldn't mind it just for the visuals, but I don't want them to just drag these characters out into some other contrived situation. All right, let's talk about the most recent episode of The Pitt. This is the 9th hour of the show. These kids supposedly think they have 3 hours left of the show, but we know there's 15 episodes in the season. So it's not going to be a nice and tidy 12-hour shift.
Definitely not, because there is another disaster that gets presented at the end of this episode that's going to turn an already chaotic ER into more of a disaster.
Yeah, as if it's not bad enough that they have the cyber attacks, they've turned off all the technology, and because of this, they've had all these redirected traffic to them, which it does still seem like they're getting redirected traffic. I'm not sure how that works considering the whole situation, given that they're now in the same technology blackout that the other locations are. But at the end of this episode, we see that there's some disaster at a water park. It looks like a slide collapsed or something like that. I think in the trailer, we actually see someone carrying someone's leg. So it looks like it's going to be pretty catastrophic. And they know it's coming to them because I guess they're the closest emergency room to that water park. And of course, I'm pretty certain there's no way that not only is this the 4th of July and we see our first firecracker incident here, there's no way that there's not some fireworks disaster that's going to compound on top of this water park disaster, which is my expectation.
Yes, I'm sure it will be exciting.
So maybe we start with the fireworks kid right away. There's a few, I think it ties a lot of the elements in the episode together and they keep circling back to it. But first of all, we find out that this kid it's the gnarliest thing in the episode, which we always see like his hand blown off and you can see like the flesh like spattered away. A very cool special effect. Looks like a practical effect where the 3 fingers work, but the 2 fingers are removed. And how realistic was this?
That was pretty good. I believed that he blew off his 4th and 5th finger for sure. And it looked real.
It's very clean, by the way. Like even when you see the x-ray, it's like all the metacarpals have been.
Yeah, there's no jagged edges. It's like a clean shot. So
yeah, it's like the bones got popped out.
It's more of like a karate chop to the metacarpals as opposed to a fireworks explosion. But that's okay.
By the way, I've had a firecracker go off in my fingers before, and like it stings your fingertips, but it does not. This, like as they said there, this is not a firecracker.
Yeah,
this is
like a firebomb.
Yeah, this is like a cherry bomb, minimally, maybe bigger than that. And of course, the story comes out that he is being watched by his sister, who I assume is an adult or at least old enough to be a guardian.
Yeah, she's a college student.
That's right.
She drops out of Ithaca to move back home because unfortunately, her Haitian parents were deported. So now she's in charge of the 12-year-old brother. So she's of college age. And this kid is getting into trouble with other kids in his apartment complex, including drinking alcohol.
Yes, he's been drinking, of course, which is a part of the problem here. Those kids in the neighborhood are a bad influence. And yeah, these kids, I was a latchkey kid and we got into nothing but trouble in the summers. So we were.
But you didn't drink alcohol when you were 12?
I did not drink alcohol when I was 12, no. I did smoke when I was 12, though.
Oh my God. You did?
I did. But the whole situation here there's like political commentary as well. Haitians were a protected class. A lot of people who were migrated here under some political protections after it's like natural disasters and political upheaval that happened in Haiti. and that was revoked under this current administration. So a lot of these people who were legal suddenly are illegal, and of course are in this situation where they're losing their protected status. I mean, you had not a Haitian patient, but you had a patient that lost his legal status recently.
Yeah, he's been living and working in the United States for over 25 years as an engineer, and he was granted asylum from Venezuela. And he was a working, functioning, tax-paying human being who had a medical problem that was finally getting taken care of because he had insurance finally after being uninsured for a long time. And then they revoked his legal status and he lost his insurance and lost the ability to get a kidney transplant.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you think about just, families like this or just people who are in that type of circumstance. Just, another thing that the show is, not subtly, by the way, but at least reminding us that there are real people who are caught up in this political conversation.
And now we're facing this sister potentially losing custody of her brother because now social services is involved and he's getting in trouble. But in the end, they don't imply that he's going to be taken away.
But remains to be seen. Yeah. All right. Another key case here. Mel's sister shows up. We've only seen her one time, I think, previously on the show. She met up with her at the end of season 1 when she finally had her shift end. And we see her sister who's on the spectrum. We've met her previously. I think Mel is probably subtly on the spectrum, to be honest.
Yeah, more on the Asperger side. Her sister is a bit more to the other direction. And I think the actress who plays that character is autistic.
Yeah. And what did you think about this? We have a few things happening here. First of all, of course, Mel is very nervous still about her deposition. Very nice to see, Langdon, who, of course, we saw Langdon in season 1, really appreciated Mel, her understanding. And we've seen him previously working with a patient that is neurodivergent and remembered to turn down the lights. And we see him taking very good care of Mel's sister, which is very sweet. Of course, it turns out to be pretty minor, just urinary tract infection. But I did make me think about this. And I've heard, you've never talked to me directly about this, but just from conversations about patients in your hospital and such, I always wonder about the whole situation, which we've seen multiple times here on the show, where if your friend or family shows up, it's like they immediately cut the line. It's like all hands on deck to help out your family member.
Yeah, 100%. I get phone calls from doctors in my practice whose friend of a friend is in the ER and can I check on them, which always puts me in a tough spot because I don't have access to their chart. I just have to go and talk to the ER doctor and tell them it's a friend of a friend to get their treatment expedited, which is fine. Hopefully it's helpful.
It's just interesting. I mean, for me, obviously, you would assume that that's the case, that you want your family to be seen first, although it is in a way, I guess, I don't know if there's any kind of regulations about that. One thing that definitely is a regulation, which is explicitly said here, or at least best practices, which is that you shouldn't treat your own family members.
I 100% agree with that because your judgment is clouded. So best to hand off to someone else to deal with. And I have, by the way, physically taken patients out of the waiting room and asked the triage nurse to get me a spot in the ER so I can examine them and therefore get their workup expedited because it's potentially a, limb-threatening problem. So, yeah, we do have the ability to be like, you come with me.
Speaking of streamlining the process, we see here that Dana has called in one of her friends who retired or semi-retired to come in, and she has been out of practice for years now, but she remembers how it used to be, and she goes in there, gets in the way of those medical...
There are medical assistants who are now assigned to be unit clerks and they can't organize anything. And this woman who is anti-digital age did everything on paper. She knows where her papers were. The same ones she used before she left the ER are in the same spot because nobody needs them or uses them. And she puts all those protocols back into play and gets the paperwork, lab work, radiology reports, everything organized within minutes. So you need old school people like that.
And you have this new girl who shows up who's saying, hey, do you need anything? I think it's also her first day on the job or very recently on the job. And she's like, oh, do you need me to take any labs up? And she's like, you come get these labs every 15 minutes. And she's like, okay, we'll do. But she's like, cracking the whip and knows how to do it. It's also funny that she knew how to she knew the test form for the fax machine, which everybody's so stressed out about the fax. I like the commentary that they're like in a private hell. First of all, they have to unjam. There's an error message, so they have to go and get on the internet to find out what does this error message mean, which means they have to like exit the building so they can get a cell signal, because obviously inside of that's how it is in any office building. You just don't have internet when you are relying on your cell network. So they have to go outside to get the cell signal, to look up the error message, to find out that it's a paper jam, to then go open it up, yank the paper jam out. They're so excited.
And then there's no toner.
Then there's no toner.
Like, what do we call?
They're like,
1985.
Where's the toner? I mean, who even knows where the toner is? It's another form of hell.
We still use fax machines and photocopiers in the hospital. So everyone that works at the desk in a hospital knows where the toner is.
Apparently, that's what I was going to say. Is like what's the funny thing about this show, that this hospital, in this fictional hospital, is so modern that they don't use a fax machine. But exactly that. But you could imagine, like, if you do not use a fax machine, I mean, they literally have to bring a fax machine there in this particular fictionalized story. That if you don't use fax, and I didn't even think about that. It's just like, you have to have toner. If the fax machine's running all day, you're going to run out of toner like right away. You're going to have wherever the toner is, you're going to have to find out where it is and make sure you have backup. Because as soon as you fill it, it's going to be out again. And these kids don't even know, like old school, like when the toner's low, you can take the thing out and you shake the toner bottle and you put it back in, and it's actually good for a little while longer. These kids don't even know that. And speaking of that whole process, we have like Javadi has screwed up. There's a couple of things I wanted to bring up here. One of them, we have this X-ray tech who is doing a wet
read. So it's not an X-ray tech, it's a radiologist who has the ability to read the films. The comment on the wet read, that's something we get all the time when you get we have residents in my hospital, like radiology residents. So you get a preliminary wet read from the resident, and then the attending comes in and reviews it, and then you get a final report. So wet reads are very common, especially overnight when the attending radiologists are not there on site to read the studies. You get a wet read. Everyone seems very baffled by this term, but it happens all the time.
This is such a modern hospital. They're not that's even familiar with that.
I guess they have no radiology residents, so they always get a final read.
They don't need radiology. They just go off, gut instinct on that show. What do you think about Joy, again, being like so precise in her vision that she can see that there's what is this she's reading on the ankle bone? She's
reading like a little separation or a widening in the syndesmosis, like the area between the bones at the distal ankle. And she thinks there's a little bit of widening to suggest the ligament could be torn. And the radiologist is like, you know what? You might be right. Have you done a radiology clerkship? She's like, nope. She just has an eye for detail. She should definitely be a pathologist since she hates people. She doesn't want anyone to die in front of her. So pathology, you have to have a keen eye for detail, looking at slides and such.
I think that's one of the subtle themes of the show, or like one of the payoffs for the show anyway, for this episode, is going to be, what does she decide to do? Because
she's going to decide to be a radiologist.
Maybe. But I was going to also say that, it feels like because she's been able to be really spot on in the emergency room, that I think, like, to your point, it shows you both sides of it. Like all the things she says, I don't want to deal with people, that she might be like, ooh, there's just something exciting about this. And me being able to see something that no one else saw and therefore get a diagnostic quicker. And then, but like to your point, if you have that eye for detail, then maybe pathology is where she should go.
Although AI might take over pathology and radiology eventually. Then where is Joy going to go?
That's true. She can shepherd all the AIs. Oh, but the other thing I was going to bring up too is like, having this old school clerk come in there and say like, where's this board? And the idea, like Javadi, speaking specifically about Javadi, how she's been so on it in general, although she's a little more distracted this season, but obviously very adept and asking questions as to what she wants to do next. And again, I think a lot of these doctors are like now starting to ask themselves questions as to how they want to proceed with their careers. And in this case, obviously it's because of this, lack of familiarity with this analog way of doing things. But first of all, I thought the nurses were putting the cases on the board, and Garcia chews her out and is like, it's Whitaker says that you have to be responsible for everything on your own because of the fact that we don't know. Everybody's overwhelmed right now. Garcia is just like downright rude to her. And, but I wanted to ask you about that case. So because they missed she forgot to put it on the board, then there was no clipboard for it. And then the test wasn't done. However, they were just basically running all the scans. This X-ray was not read because it wasn't attached to a patient record. Her and Whitaker run down this radiologist before he takes off. And they find this x-ray. And I didn't even understand this case. What did they see in the x-ray?
So she had a massive sigmoid volvulus, which is where the intestine like twists. And then you have a massively dilated intestine. And in her case, she becomes unstable and they have to take her to the operating room. So they didn't get the diagnosis right away because it got lost in the pile of radiology films, as you mentioned. So they see the x-ray, they realize how bad it is, and they run over there. And then Javati's now in trouble for a delay of care because she didn't have the chart set up in the right way to get the results right away.
Yeah, now that makes a lot more sense. I didn't understand what this case was about because I thought she was having a heart attack, so I'm not sure. And then
she became unresponsive, so I initially was like, oh no, she's having a heart attack. That nausea was a heart attack being masked. And then it turns out that it's this twisting of her intestine.
Yeah, that's why I had that question. I think probably because you said right away that she's having a heart attack. And that was your initial diagnostic. Because then when Garcia was like, I could have solved this in 60 seconds, an hour.
With a rectal tube.
And I was like, a rectal tube for a heart attack? What are you talking about?
Oh, I sent you down the wrong path there, Victor. Sorry about that.
The rectal path. Yeah, so Javati is dealing with her issues there. We don't see much about the Javati-Ogilvy competition this week, but I just made me laugh when I remembered the whole thing where Robbie's like, any other questions, and then ignores, 90% of the people's hands, but answers what he thinks is the most pressing questions. And every time Ogilvy raises his hand, he's just like, Ogilvy, put your hand down. He's like, what do you mean?
And then he doesn't call on Javati either. She's got her hand in the air and she's like so frustrated by it. So like the lower level folks that are raising their hand are not going to be acknowledged. Yeah.
When he's like, does anyone have questions? He's basically only asking the administrative people. I missed a little bit of this. What is it? They were all hot for the radiologist. Is that what I missed?
Apparently they're like wide-eyed and drooling over this guy who is sitting there reading the x-rays. And they were like, come on, come back. Where are you?
Yeah, everybody's staring at him. And then like what did Princess say at one point? I'm good at things too.
I mean, the guy wasn't that good looking. So that's why we're all like, what is everyone doing here?
I honestly was confused by all of that because when they were saying like he's just more of a distraction, I thought just having the equipment there was a distraction. I didn't realize until like the women started to like fawn over him. I was like, oh, I didn't get that. But weren't they staring at Robbie too at one point?
I didn't get that.
Wasn't that what they were looking? Oh, maybe I confused it. Maybe I thought. Well,
no, they're staring at the radiologist.
Oh, the radiologist
was in there,
and he was just sitting there. Okay, I was very confused. I asked you about it. I'm like, what are they looking at? I couldn't figure out what's happening.
They're looking at the radiologist.
Okay, well
see, you never get to see radiologists in person unless you go stalk them in their dark radiology. No one's seen this guy before.
It's like a unicorn. Okay, a couple of things about Robbie and Abbott here. Of course, we saw Abbott being suicidal last year and now apparently still taking on some dangerous, being a medic with the SWAT team. So he likes to live on the edge. We know Robbie doesn't ride his helmet, doesn't wear his helmet when he goes riding. And now, of course, going on this trip. And Abbott explicitly telling him, like, make sure you come back. But weirder than that is that Robbie tells Whitaker that he can stay and house sit. And Whitaker's very excited about this. As part of this conversation where he's worried that Whitaker's taking his work home, which is maybe something that Robbie's done in the past as well, in having this potential relationship, but minimally this overextending, trying to help this woman whose husband died, this farmer. But then he says to Whitaker that he can stay there as long as he wants in case he doesn't come back.
I know. That comment made me so upset because now Robbie is foreshadowing that he could potentially go off into the sunset and die or never return. So I don't like that comment at all. Noah Wiley.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stress, obviously, in this job. Speaking of that, you have Dana with the student nurse, whose name I forget again. But they have this really nice unpacking of the whole rape case from last week. And Dana was telling her she did a really good job. And she's like, you did a really good job, which of course, truly, what a great job she did there in taking care of that patient. I love that we actually had that conversation ourselves after the actual, when she comes back again. Just the idea that at least, if you process the kit or you actually do the rape kit, at least you can take some recourse in the future. And that's literally what this girl told her. And Dana compliments her on that as well. But she asks, is it always like this? And she's like, minus the cyber attack? Yeah, that's pretty much how it is.
Yeah, this is her first day, so she doesn't really know what to expect. And the level of craziness of this ER, I guess, is their baseline.
And another touching moment here is this cancer mother again, who of course has been this case that's been ongoing. I feel terrible for this mom, by the way. McKay there, of course, is very sympathetic to her as well. Now that everybody's left, the family's left. Earlier in the episode, she has this like moment of respite before they all come back and they're like, hey, what kind of ice cream do you want to have now? And she's trying to put on a brave face again. And everyone's just trying to act like, yeah, it's fine. Everything's fine, guys. Which is, I mean, on the one hand, I understand them trying to make this as stable as possible for the kids. But you can't just act like everything's normal until the day she's gone, because that's not fair to the kids either, right? Like the kids there has to be some kind of transition. It can't just be like, everything's fine. We're acting like everything's status quo and she's going to get better. And then she dies one day and then they're left in the lurch. So all of this is very obviously complicated, dealing with this in any way. But I just have so much empathy for this woman who just basically wants to be like left alone so that she can and not feel guilty about making this decision. And it's like literally impossible for her to have that moment of reflection for herself.
I know, and they've had her in every episode of this season so far. So you see her going through this process each week. And yeah, I think it is her time, and her family not quite on board with her leaving this world, but they're going to have to soon enough, because she's kind of making a resolution that now is her time, which a lot of people at end of life do that. They finally resign to the fact that it's time to go. And then it happens fairly quickly after that. How that is, I don't know. If you have this premonition that your time is limited and that you're going to need to say goodbye to your family and just have a moment of peace, which of course they won't allow. Here, have some ice cream. Have this, have that. Hi, mom. She's like, putting on a face because she wants
just throw the youngest son right on top of her. Like, hey, sit on the sofa sit on the bed with mom. It's like, yeah, that's what she wants, right? Considering she is like in excruciating pain, just moving her leg.
Yeah, and her husband is a sympathetic character, but no one really knows what this woman's going through except for the patient herself. And
I mean, everybody's in denial. Like you see her parents here, which we just seen for the first time. And they're the same thing. Like, hey, let's have ice cream. Let's open mom's first. That's her favorite flavor. And nobody wants to accept the fact that her time is very short. And of course, however she's lived so far and how many times she's had remissions, and they're probably like, this is just more of the same. And she's trying to be like, I'm tired of fighting and it's getting worse and I don't want to do this anymore. But how do you say that when you have a family?
And I think that's what a lot of families do when they have a family member who's dying, is they focus on the minutia, on the little things that they can understand, like it's time to eat ice cream. Like, we're going to give mom her favorite ice cream, as you said. So that stuff gives you something to do with your time as opposed to thinking big picture. Because
another one of these touching details here in the show is this overweight characters come back who it's still, I find very funny, unintentionally funny, how incredibly proficient he is on the touchpad, being able to string these full sentences together by just looking at these pictures on the screen. Anyway, that's the fact he can communicate, back and forth with his sister in near real time conversation is all of that, like I said, unintentionally comedic. A bigger question I have, though, is, or I should say just kind of observations about this, is, they have to go outside. Again, how inconvenient it is to have this person who's like, you literally want to get them up to surgery as quickly as possible. And now, in the meantime, you have to drag them outside to try to get the sister on a phone. Very sad, just the subtext of this, that he's estranged from his sister. You can only imagine sometimes people who have these food addictions or any kind of addiction, they have some kind of pain in their past. And when she's saying, I'm sorry I left you behind, but I just had to, for the sake of her child and her family, they needed to get out of that situation. So it seemed to be like some toxic dynamic in the family. And this is very sad, but at the same time, it's very interesting when they ask him, what are your chances of survival? If I don't do the surgery, it's 100% chance of fatality, basically. And I have a question as to this actual prognosis. And then a 50% chance of dying during the surgery, which seems like a really rough trade-off, but hey, it's not 100%. And maybe that conversation with his sister gives him the courage to go through with it. But first of all, what is happening to him?
He has perforated diverticulitis, which is like where you can get little bits of food particles and stool that get stuck in these little outpouchings of your colon. And if they get infected and they rupture, it's basically like colon contents spilling into your abdomen, which makes you potentially septic and unstable if you're not cared for in a timely fashion. However, he does not appear to have any of those things. He's on the phone communicating. His blood pressure is okay. And they're commenting that there's a 50% mortality for a patient who has perforated diverticulitis.
Is that partially due to his obesity, though?
It has to be. I don't know if those statistics are correct. It seems a little high, the mortality risk that is quoted. Obviously, patients who are super morbidly obese have a higher complication rate than the average person. So they're going to get him to the OR now. I assume he's now agreed to surgery, right?
I assume
he needs to consent still.
Right. He hasn't signed, but I do think that when Abbott wheels him back in, it seems like they're taking him back to the operating room. They're not putting him back into one of the rooms down in the ER. A couple of questions I had on that. One was, I think they specifically said that when they first sidebarred in the very first episode or whatever, the first episode he rolled in, that might have been the second episode. But in that one, that they did mention that if he has to have surgery, that his mortality would be higher given or the risk of mortality was higher because of his size. Yeah. And that's when they sidebarred with Garcia the first time. The second question I was going to have was about Garcia, not only her having terrible bedside manner, but didn't she just bring that other woman upstairs for the colon surgery? Like, is this normal? Like, is there only one surgeon allocated to the entire
I know.
ER?
She's like the triage surgeon. She's like, you need an operation, you go upstairs. Hi, I'm back. She's obviously not doing the operations because she's physically in the ER.
But it sounds like she's doing it. Like when she said, I could have resolved this in 60 seconds, but maybe she's not saying like me, like if I'm doing the surgery, but theoretically anybody up there, because it does seem like she literally is downstairs and she's like, I need to fix that kid's hand, bring him upstairs, comes back downstairs. He's doing okay. Give me the lady with the perforated colon. Okay. Now give me.
I know. She's like,
this is a 1 hour episode. Did she do 3 surgeries in an hour?
In my emergency room, we have a surgical resident who gets all the surgical consults and then triages them to the appropriate surgeon on call for each specialty. So she's sort of functioning in that way as like the surgical triage person who's deciding in conjunction with an attending, although I thought she was a trauma surgery resident. So anyway, you haven't seen her attending anywhere. She's functioning like the
That actually makes sense because not only she like literally popped in for any kind of surgical consultation in this particular episode, or almost everyone, because there was that other guy they brought down there who, for the leg, the woman who lost her leg.
The necrotizing fasciitis.
Yes, that necrotizing.
Although no, another resident showed up for that.
Initially.
And then she comes in.
Right. So not only has she been down there a bunch of times, just in this is just one day, but also in the first season, she seemed to have a similar role during this shift. So maybe this is kind of a relationship. Like you said, she might be triaging like what's going on up in the operating room because she can't possibly be doing the surgery. And I mean, like, think about it. If she was doing the other surgery, how is she back down there to consult?
It's a slightly exaggerated, her role, but it's basically on point with having a resident assessing patients who need surgery.
Anything other than the big revelation at the end about this disaster? Anything else that pops to mind? Ogilvy, turns out that was an interesting little character shading. Ogilvy sees that guy. Oh, well, I have a question as to what your diagnosis for that guy is who has the kidney pain. But the guy gets very pedantic about his use of grammar. And then he says, well, my dad was an English teacher. And he's like, oh, he's an English teacher. So they kind of commiserate on that. And he goes, your dad must be very happy that you're a doctor now. And he goes, I wouldn't know. So kind of a little something telling you that there's yet another family dynamic problem here within the show. A little more character development. Anything else Santos and Garcia, that they're having a little trouble?
Santos is having trouble all around,
everywhere,
including with her outside relationships. So her advice at the end is don't date at work. Pretty good advice to take. Yeah, the English teacher has CVA tenderness, which is costovertebral angle. When you hit it with your hand, it hurts if there's a stone over there because that's where your kidneys are. So that was just a positive physical exam finding that he may have like a kidney infection or a stone, which that could potentially go either way.
But it looked healthy. I mean, it looked like it was when they scanned it.
Yes, he didn't have any hydro, so no fluid around it. So maybe it's just simply a simple small kidney stone that needs to pass. Yeah. Nothing too crazy with that case.
Other little things like Princess won she correctly guessed the cyber attack.
Princess was cheating.
She was cheating.
She got inside info that the other hospital had a cyber attack, and now she's rolling in the cash.
I like how she has a side conversation in public because they're the only ones who speak whatever dialect they speak, a Philippine dialect. And if Santos was around, she would know. But she's like, how much do you want to keep your mouth shut? And she's like, I want 50%.
Gotta take the bribe.
Oh, and the only other thing I was going to mention is, speaking of, you're talking about like don't date, or Santos was saying my advice is don't date anyone on the job, that we see McKay talking about how she hasn't dated anyone since her divorce, which apparently is years ago. And now she thinks she's ready for it. And we saw her flirting with that soccer player and kind of making a date to meet up at the museum so she could kind of back out because it's a public place. If she doesn't show up, she could be like, oh, I was there. I didn't run into you, or vice versa. She has the option if she wants to. So that tells you something. But more importantly is that she has this conversation with Mohan, who I feel is so underserved this whole entire season. And now she's talking about how, well, I was thinking about going back home because there was this guy, this old man who was just here to get attention. And maybe that's what my mom needs too. And that's why she's dating this guy. So I don't even know what they're trying to develop here. But the reason it's problematic is because they've so underdeveloped her character so far. And now in next week's preview, we see her like suddenly collapsing and having some kind of condition. So I'm like, all right, what's happening with her now? They're just desperately trying to
give her a storyline when she hasn't really had a storyline.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm not particularly vested in that character of the show.
So maybe we could check in a little bit here on the season so far. So this is about where the catastrophe hits last season, which of course we didn't know what we were in for in season 1. So like when things really got out of control, for me watching it, of course, I warned you that something big was coming. So you kind of knew it was going to happen. But for me watching this show, I'm just like, this is just a week-to-week procedural. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, what is happening on the show? So it's kind of doesn't do it any favors that has a formula now that it has to follow. And I mean, they can play with that formula, by the way, right? Like they are giving us a disaster at almost exactly the same moment we did last season. As I mentioned, I'm pretty sure that, everything's going to be like, thank God the Waterpark thing is under control, like 2 or 3 weeks from now when their shift is coming to an end. And actually, then there's a fireworks disaster that occurs, and then you get a second or a third wave, and which then that could be like, hey, is it every week? Like with a cyber attack, there's a Waterpark, there's a fireworks, potentially a fireworks type disaster forthcoming, that maybe that seems like a little tedious too. But I mean, they could still play with this. But how do you feel about the show this year versus last year and how it's been paced so far? And
I like the pacing of it. I think for TV watching purposes, to have some sort of disaster thrown in just increases the drama of the show for viewership to continue, even though, how many really terrible things can you have happened to one emergency department? So I'm still on board with the show. I like the characters, and their level of medical accuracy is great. I could just see like how many seasons of the same thing could we have to still keep an audience watching it. I think if they continue with the character development, they could potentially continue the show.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's more like, to be honest, there's like more growing pains in season 2, because you think about how long ER ran for, and or Grey's Anatomy, another example. And it's like you can always bring in new cast members, especially here where, you have like new residents showing up. And if you like characters that are fan favorites, that you could see them year to year, right? We check in with them every single year. And now that person is like now could be in the surgery department, right? And that person, so we can keep the characters around. The
characters can now become ER doctors, surgeons, blah, 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 and continue to interact with each other in a different way as they mature.
And can come in as patients. You can imagine somebody like leaving and then coming in as a patient later on. And then you're like, oh yeah, but how are you going to bring that? Isn't that kind of ridiculous? How do you bring one of the old cast members as a patient for a whole season of show? I'm like, the whole season of show is one shift. You could definitely have a patient there for one shift.
The one thing they can't do is have Dr. Robbie die on a motorcycle. That can't happen. I mean, like Dr. Green in ER, he eventually died, but it was years down the road. Oh, so obviously that can't happen.
I think there's no mystery that the one thing that, not only because he's the creator of the show, Noah Wiley, which of course he could still be like, I don't want to be on the show anymore, and I'm still getting paid because I'm a producer on the show. But I think I'm pretty sure that the success of the show early on he is going to be the
For sure.
repeated pattern that's going to string together year over year. Eventually, you could shock everybody and he dies in the middle of a shift or something, and something tragic can happen that way. And then there'll be some other character who seems like a obvious, replacement for him for the center of attention.
There's no replacing him.
He left even ER. He left ER.
Yeah, but how many years later? 15?
Well, but that's my point. This show can run for 15 years if they want to, because it doesn't have to be like this, like, oh, there's a giant catastrophe every single year. The simple fact is that you could have you could have just a bunch of new characters and students and people cycling in. We could check in with these characters and they could just come in as guests. You can imagine that like someone is now on the surgical floor and one of the fan favorites, and maybe that person's career is taking off outside the show. And they pop in for 3 or 4 episodes in the middle of the season. You're like, oh, wow, it's so great to see that person. So as the cast gets bigger and there's more and more of these characters that we love, you could keep bringing new characters in and keep tying them back to the other characters who can come in, even for cameos, like I mentioned. So this thing could just keep running and running. And think about medical shows in general. You can always have like a case of the week, and it doesn't have to be like every case is a big deal. Everybody could just like be mending wounds and taking care of some idiot who, went skateboarding on a TikTok video or something on the side. And you could have like one really compelling case that like no one can figure out, like a house type case that the whole floor is trying to figure out. We're trying to save this person's life. And that could be like one big story that carries the whole entire season forward. It's only one. It's incredible because they only have to have enough stories for like a 1 shift period of time, right?
Yeah. And there's many, many medical problems that exist in the world. So there's many more stories to tell. And hopefully Robbie doesn't die. And hopefully Noah Wiley doesn't become the next CDC director and leave the show.
Noah Wiley should become the next CDC director. Well, we'll see if that's what the plot twist is at the end of this season.
That would be hilarious.
And then that all remains to be seen. So we are now 6 episodes to go, almost 2/3 of the way through the season. We'll be 2/3 of the way through the season next week. We'll be touching base after we watch those episodes. And we are still watching DTF St. Louis on HBO Max. And The Rooster is premiering this week too. We'll be watching that same night, the new Steve Carell comedy. So we will be watching that the same night. And Sona and I will be sampling it and seeing what we think of it, and maybe continue watching that too, if we like it. We'll see. And there's plenty of stuff to discuss. There's so many premieres coming in the near term. And Darren and I continuing to watch Paradise as well. Stuff to watch right now.
I'm going to start watching some of those shows, I swear.
You're a whole season behind on Paradise, so you might want to...
How about DTF?
You're only 1 week behind on that.
I can do that.
So yeah, we will check in on all that. And of course, Some Drops of God wraps up next week. We'll try to find something else to watch in tandem after. I think I have a show.
Leave me in suspense until next week.
I will. All right. Thanks again for the conversation.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.